Can't be true. Hi, Deborah. Sorry, like, they never speak to me. Okay. Let's finish up this chapter. I think we left off at coronary artery bypass graft, because we would not have had the strength to go through that. Okay, so I'm on page 423. And just like with 9, I'm going to suggest that you put these arteries in your code book. There is a picture in the back of your PCS book of the coronary arteries, but it doesn't have all of them there. So, I mean, they're not labeled anyway. So, on page 773, if you remember to look there, that might be a good place to put them, because some of them are already there. On page 773 in your PCS book, in the top right-hand corner are the arteries of the heart. But I would add to that because they're not all listed there. And then in addition to the ones you have in the book, I ran across one, the ramus, R-A-M-U-S, that would be on the left side. Ramus, also referred to as intermediate. They're calling that a variant artery, whatever that means. Shows up variously. No variant basis. So that might be another name you might see. Ramus or intermediate. And remember, we're not coding by the number of arteries that are treated. You're coding by the actual number of blockages that are treated. But this helps you count them. Okay, because at least you can see, oh, they did one occlusion in the diagonal and one occlusion in the posterior descending. So it helps you to count them out. And then you'll just have to watch if they did more than one in the same artery. Okay. And I was telling them the first thing to me is to, because they'll, they talk about CABGs, coronary artery bypass graft. But there's more than one way to do those, and by that I mean you got to figure out where the blood's coming from. Do you remember that from 9? You need to know if it's an aortocoronary bypass, which means that the blood is coming from the aorta. They've taken some sort of device, which will either be saphenous vein, autologous arterial tissue, synthetic substitute. They've taken something to use as a graft, and they've hooked it into the aorta, and then they've gone around the blockage and put it into the coronary artery. And you can actually see a picture of that on page 424 in that figure 28.8. See the aorta, is the one that has the big hook on top. And you can see on the left-hand side of that heart picture, see that little pink that's hooked into the aorta? And then it comes down around that blockage in the big red vessel and hooks into the artery below that. So that's the bypass. It's going from the aorta down to the coronary artery, which makes it an aortocoronary bypass. The blood's coming from the aorta. Okay? When you talk about an internal mammary bypass, you can see a picture of that on the right side of the heart. Notice that nothing's hooked into the aorta there. It's actually hooked into the subclavian artery. So what they've done is they've just loosened one end of the internal mammary artery. It's not a free graft. That one end is still hooked to where it was originally hooked on. Okay? So they just unhook one end and they bring it down around the blockage and hook it into the coronary artery. That's internal mammary artery bypass. The blood is coming from the internal mammary artery, not the aorta. Okay. So of course all of these are going to code out as bypasses. So let's look up in the index bypass and then artery and then coronary. And you can see they all send you to table 021. So let's go look at 021. It's on page 164. And basically, if you're coding an aortocoronary bypass, you're going to be in that top row. Okay? And remember, you're going to code by the number of sites that were bypassed. That's your body part. If you're talking about a non-coronary bypass, remember the bypass is where it started and the qualifier is where it ended. But in coronary bypass, the body part is going to be the number of bypasses that were done, the number of blockages that were bypassed, and then your qualifier is going to tell you where the blood's coming from. Okay. So the aortocoronary mainly coming out of that top row. Okay, the device is going to be where you say, was it autologous vein, which a lot of them are autologous vein. They use that saphenous vein. And you know they have to reverse that, so you may see them say reverse saphenous vein, you know, because veins send the blood back up, so they have the valves that close it off. So when they put it in, they have to put it the other way so it acts like an artery and allows the blood to go through. So that's why you might see them, hear them say reverse saphenous vein graft. Okay. They could use a segment of the internal mammary artery. That's kind of where it gets confusing, because they can take a portion of that artery, hook it into the aorta, and bypass it. But then the blood's coming from the aorta, and that's what makes it aortocoronary. Okay, so if they take a segment of the internal mammary artery, that means they cut a portion of it out, they hooked one end to the aorta and the other end around to the coronary artery. Then that's still aortocoronary because the blood's coming from the aorta. Okay? And they could use a synthetic substitute or non-autologous tissue substitute. And you can see then your qualifier for those, if it's aortocoronary, is coming from W, the aorta. That's where the blood's coming from. So that's how those are going to code out. The second line is where your internal mammary artery bypasses are going to code out. The ones where they just loosen it and then bring it down around. Okay? So again, you're going to code the number of sites. Probably the most you're going to have is 2 because you only got 2 internal mammary arteries. So it's either going to be right or left. Okay? And then no device. Okay? So even though it's your own artery, it's not a free graft. You still have it hooked into one end. So it's not really a device. In a way, you're wondering like, well, why don't they just use reposition? But it's a bypass. They're making a new route for the blood to go. You know, but really that's all they're doing is moving one end of it to a different place.
I know you said this. So on my qualifier,